Have you ever been curious about the differences between domestic adoption and international adoption? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today on All About Adoption. Hi, I'm Stephanie A, and let's get started. So let's talk about the cost difference. Basically, there's none. There's not a cost difference between international and domestic adoption. There used to be a cost difference, I would say, about, even 12, 15 years ago, but there's not anymore. So the typical cost for an international or domestic adoption is going to be between $25,000 and $50,000. When it comes to the fees that are due for adoption, when they are due, it's significantly different between domestic and international. So with domestic adoptions, you basically need to be ready to roll with all of your funds at the point that you enter into an agency or when you start the domestic adoption process, because you could literally receive placement within 2 days because there are last minute adoptions that happen. So even though adoptions can take up to 2 years domestically, you're going to find that, you might be one of the lucky families that it happens for quickly. So you really need to be ready to roll with all the money. With international adoptions, the bulk of it's due at the point that you travel, which could be 12 to 24 months after starting the adoption process. So that's one of the bigger differences, is that you have a little more time to gather your funds around internationally than you would domestically. So the age range. So with domestic adoptions, typically they're newborns. And if you're adopting from foster care, that could be all the way up to age 18. Now, when you're adopting internationally, the youngest child is typically going to be around 1. There used to be infants available internationally, but that's just not true anymore because most countries, the children usually become available for adoption within the country are going to be toddler age. And then it can go all the way up to age 16 or 17, depending on the country of when the child is considered aging out and that you're allowed to bring the child to the United States. I briefly touched on timeline already, but internationally it can take 12 to 24 months to adopt, and domestically it could take 2 weeks to 2 years. It just depends on when the right situation comes along. The timeline for international adoptions has more to do with the country. Some countries are a little faster in their adoption process than others. Information that is available on the child. Domestically, you're going to have probably quite a bit of information. Usually, most placements happen, I wouldn't say most, but some placements happen from birth. So therefore you have information, or even if the child's in foster care, you usually have quite a bit of information on the children that you're adopting. Whereas internationally, some of the times the children are abandoned, and so therefore you don't have information and comprehensive background on the child only until the point that the child enters into the care of the country from a foster care or an orphanage. That's when you start getting information, but anything prior to that just really isn't available. So one of the other differences is that domestically you'll be creating a profile for expecting mothers to be able to look at. You'll also create a video, and you're waiting to be chosen. And with international, you're referred a child. And therefore, no longer are you waiting to be chosen, you're now doing the choosing because the referral comes to you. And so that's one big difference between domestic and international. Closed versus open adoption. Domestically, you're most likely going to have an open adoption, and internationally, you're most likely going to have a closed adoption. Although I caution families who want to go into international adoptions because they are closed and that's what they prefer, because they may not always be closed. With DNA testing, a lot of people are finding each other when DNA is put into registries, and there are connections that are being made internationally between birth family and adopted persons. So you'll find that international is not always going to be a closed adoption. And lastly, in domestic adoptions, women who are placing their children for adoption who are pregnant are typically choosing to place their child, and they're choosing the family that they want to place their child with. Now that's different in foster care. Typically it's the state placing the child for adoption after parental rights have been terminated. But in international adoptions, the children are usually abandoned or orphaned. And so those are the ways that the children come into care and become available for adoption. So I hope you found that helpful, the differences between international and domestic adoption. As always, feel free to drop any questions below. I'd be happy to answer anything further for you. Thanks. Bye.